It's the midweek edition of Business Morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwago. By tomorrow, October 1, Nigeria will clock 60 years since independence from colonial rule. But 6 decades on, the country is mired in many problems. It is struggling to build an economic model that encourages enduring growth, addresses poverty, and provides a future for its youth. 60 years after independence, Nigeria's economic potential is constrained by many structural issues, including inadequate infrastructure, tariff and not tariff barriers to trade, obstacles to investment, lack of confidence in currency valuation, and limited foreign exchange capacity. Where did we get it all wrong? I'm being joined by an economist and the chief consultant at B. Adedipe and Associates, Dr. Biodo Adedipe, to give us more insight and the way forward. Good morning, Dr. Adedipe. Thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Good morning, Chibeze, and I thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So how would you assess Nigeria's macroeconomic performance 60 years after independence, talking about inflation rate, GDP, and unemployment rate?
That's a very big question, which is looking back at the last 60 years in terms of what has happened to our economy. I will say that as of today, we've had in the last 60 years pockets of macroeconomic stability, which means simply we have not been able to sustain that on a persistent basis. Yes, granted that in economic management over such a period of time, we of course come into crisis and turbulence and the rest of it, but we have not been able to build resilience into our system because of the bouquet of policy choices we made over this period of time. We've had many times policy reversals. Some policies were quite good and of course in the right direction, but we also had issues relating to policy sequencing. And so it's not just about having, what I would describe as a bundle of policies, but how did we sequence them? Which simply is about which one should come before the other. And of course, it means in essence that there were some periods we tamed inflation, and some periods it got out of hand, obviously for things we either did not do that we were supposed to do, or things we did we were not supposed to do. So we never learned from the mistakes of other countries that had emerged over this period of time. Looking back at independence, we have a good idea where Nigeria was. We have also a good idea of how we moved over time and which countries we could compare ourselves with. But in the course of time, a number of those countries, and I will mention just 2 of them today, Singapore and South Korea, have today left Nigeria behind because of their own approach to economic management. So you equally see the same in the exchange value of our currency, which today more or less dictates the way we interpret what is happening to our economy, and quite unfortunately too. Because really, when you talk about the exchange value of your currency, it is a reflection primarily of how strong your economy is and how stable it is relative to the economies of your major trading partners. And so in the course of time, we have not been able to also get a good handle of that. And simply because we departed from what I would describe as the way an economy should be managed. And that is 3 things we are missing. And this is what a lesson we took from the Singaporeans, okay? For them to emerge today as a first world economy, they put 3 things at the front burner. Number 1 is meritocracy, which means the right pegs were put in the right holes. If it was square peg would be the square hole. If the hole is round, get a round peg put in that hole. So now that was one major plank of their own, evolution and transformation. Secondly, is what, for me, as a professional economist, I've advocated in the last 11 years, especially with the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009, and that is pragmatism, which means it should not be a matter of looking back to where we were 60 years ago at independence. Should Nigeria go capitalist or should we go socialist? That is no longer the conversation today. And that is why many times when I look at the kind of economic policies we bring forward, we either want to make so much noise about the market system, forgetting that experience has also proven all over the world of market failures. So in which case, pragmatism says, look, whatever works for us today is what we should take. review Nigeria's peculiar situation and ask ourselves, what will work here? If the mindset of the regular Nigerian is that you bring out a policy, all it thinks about first is, how do I make the policy, not thinking about how do we execute this policy to make things work better. That means in thinking out policies, you must think 2-3 levels. First level is, this is the policy we want to bring forward. How will those we expect to execute this respond to this? So if they respond in the particular way we're expecting, how would policy also respond? We never took seriously what we call regulatory impact analysis. So we make regulations, we don't measure the impact, and therefore get a proper idea in terms of what we want to deliver. So all of this also have to be the most fundamental, the exchange value of your currency, and I've been saying this repeatedly. What it means simply is that we can never get Naira to where it will support productivity in Nigeria until we come to terms with the nexus between production and consumption, until we begin to produce what we consume and celebrate what we produce. We may not get anywhere. And that brings me to the issue of South Korea. Now, I was a part of a conversation way back in 1988 in Nigeria. We're then doing a study of the steel subsector in Nigeria. And one of the things we learned in the process was that South Korea actually came and took a copy of a Jakarta steel complex. And that was what they went and developed, a replica of a Jakarta that today we gleefully find all over the world. But buy and ride automobiles produced in South Korea. So we all see the Kia brand that is celebrated all over the world. In fact, in 2013, Kia won the model as the best-selling automobile in America, the home of automobile as we call it. So the question really for us today is, where exactly do we want to see ourselves in the next 60 years? So the convention really is talking about the last 60 years, but we should not be talking about the next 60 years. So which we put in terms of what is happening this year as the next normal. So Nigeria's next normal should be focused on production and also on productivity. And government itself must lead the process of committing to consuming what is produced in Nigeria. Now, for me, until our federal government budget gets to a point where 80% of it is spent buying things that are made in Nigeria, where we begin also to look at products and services that are provided by Nigerian entities, and not coming to tell me about, oh, global best practices. Yes, it is good to learn from the best in the world, but must we continually give projects, contracts of governments to foreign entities? Any money they make from there goes outside of Nigeria. So it doesn't help to create a multiplier effect in India. So these are the issues that eventually culminate in the high rate of unemployment and therefore makes us unable to break that particular hold.
Okay, you talked about policy choices, policy inconsistency, policy sequencing. Now, looking at how the government, the various policies, different governments have tried to come up with, seeing poverty and inequality remaining a big challenge for the country. Now, looking back, would you say Nigerians have been better off? In fact, the present administration actually came up with what they called Agenda 2050. Yes, we've seen, rather Vision 2050, we've seen different visions, Vision 2020, and of course different agenda. Now they have Vision 2050, which of course is aimed at reducing poverty in Nigeria. And you talked about the question should be, where would we be in the next 60 years? Now, looking at these various plans the present administration is putting in place, where do you think that will take us to and how?
Thank you so very much for that question. Now, for me as an analyst, one thing I've seen missing each time we sit down to talk about plans, and I've been a part of a couple of them over the years, okay? We've seen when we were in school, dimension in the first National Development Plan. We saw the second one. By the time we did the third one, everything unraveled. Then we began to now look for ideas from all over the world that had no bearing with what we experience here in Nigeria. So the key issue for me is that if we are looking forward, we must have some particular sectors, not more than 3, that will represent our policy anchor. We case from either one particular sector that we see as key, or maximum 3 of them which means everything we do will be anchored around that. I remember bringing to a conversation when the economic agenda of the President Jonathan was being done in 2011. I brought in a conversation then and said, look, for anyone in the cabinet of the president, and the same thing applies to us today, building a road or citing any major government infrastructure project in a particular location in Nigeria should be based on the economic value that we are going to create within that space. In which case, it is not about you build a road to my village simply because I'm a minister of President Buhari's cabinet. So that means our choices of the infrastructure to build, number one, we connect with our policies and programs. The way it works is there are 3 P's there. Where you start from is your policy, then following that will be the programs that will deliver the policy, and then you have projects that will deliver the programs. The 3 of them must be connected. If they are not, you are only groping in the dark. You won't see any significant change in productivity, neither will you see an improvement in the employment situation. I would rather use employment, not unemployment now, because that's what we are aiming to. So it then means, therefore, that in order for us to get it right, we must tightly focus on 1 to 3 sectors, where everything we therefore do in terms of either building roads, the rail tracks, of course, power supply, and the rest of it, even the scheduling of power supply, for example, we may not be able to generate enough power to meet our demand. But we then begin to prioritize which areas are we going to ensure we allocate more power to. So you won't allocate power to where I live because I'm in the cabinet of the current president. Rather, you allocate power to where I live if it happens to be within an industrial zone, where production is taking place, where jobs are being created. So in which case, it is not about having power available to households that only use it to watch television and do other things that relate to just pleasures. But every priority will be focused on production until we get to that and plan for it. Yes, we may have power outages, for example, but there is a prior notice that there will be outage in a particular industrial estate. So the producers there can therefore plan and schedule their production activities. Now, until we get around to that, we don't be talking about plans as mere theory, mere academic exercise. We saw Vision 2010 come and go. Vision 2020 is also gone because this is the year 2020. Of course, we're not talking about Vision 2050. Nothing will change unless we approach this differently. More importantly, I started by talking about meritocracy and then pragmatism. The third component is honesty. Yeah, this government talks so much about corruption. You can never successfully fight corruption unless you start from the top. If the ones you deal with are these little thieves, and the big ones remain, and in fact, they are more or less celebrated and given awards all over the place, if that means you are not ready yet to fight corruption. If we truly want to fight that, and that's a major bane of our development here in Nigeria, until we deal with that, I call it the number 5 problem. I put it as leakages. The first issue depends so much on hydrocarbons. A story that whether we like it or not, will change in the next 10 to 20 years. Because all around the world, companies and governments are already thinking of how to move away from hydrocarbons between year 2030 and year 2040. This is within the 50-year plan the government is talking about. So what deliberate steps are we going to take to also ensure that Nigeria will no longer be talking about the price of crude oil, the volume we produce, the volume we export, as the major drivers of our national budget? So which means everyone thinks only about that. So when the price of crude oil goes down, we begin to, feel jittery. So until we look at that plan and say oil becomes completely irrelevant in that plan. But if I see the details of it, and I see you talking about projection of what we earn from crude oil, from associated gas, from condensate, and we say that we have not started yet planning for a transformed Nigerian economy that will create jobs for its children and citizens in large numbers to move away from mystery.
Now, if I may ask Dr. Adedipe, do you think the Nigerian economy require a restructuring as some civil society groups have consistently clamored for? What would be the model for the economy?
Thank you very much. Now, for that question, I will stay within my space as a professional economist. So for me, therefore, when you talk about restructuring, I will put it in context of restructuring of the fiscal federalism that we practice now. The major problem I've seen with Nigeria over the times I've been reviewing and analyzing this economy is that too much resources are concentrated in the center. So in which case, if you have a center that takes close to half of the what comes to the inflation account, that means the focus of everyone, politicians and all business people, companies, will be the center. So until we address the fiscal federalism and restructure it, we may not really get a departure from what we are looking at today. So, and that is why I jokingly tell people when we discuss that, look, if the Nigerian economy works because the subnational governments are delivering what is expected of them, nobody will have to worry much about the person sitting in Aso Rock. It then wouldn't matter who is in Aso Rock. In which case also, within that context, you recognize that whoever gets there based on meritocracy. Whoever gets there is there because this person is honest. Whoever gets there, this is someone who will look after Nigeria's interest and not begin to look at the interest of those that are competing with us. So if every policy I adopt, therefore, is about protecting the interest of one particular foreign government or entity, it means then that I am working against the interest of Nigeria. The basic thing about nations is that competition between nations is what we call a zero-sum game. Zero-sum because whatever Nigeria gains is a loss to the rest of the world. That is talking about other countries, okay? And whatever any other country gains, let's say Ghana, South Africa, Egypt, in Africa here, whatever they gain is a loss to us. So in which case, how do we position ourselves in such a way that we attract more resources and retain the ones that are within and make the best use of what you have available? So until we begin to think and act along that line, we'll just be talking about, theory, it will be academic exercise. Look at the federal allocation formula that we look at today. We need to look at it critically and redress that and bring it to a situation where more resources are devolved to the subnational levels. And that means local and state government. Then add on to that, like the CSOs are arguing, accountability and transparency, until those two are also brought to bear. In which case, I can rise up as a citizen and challenge the government of the state where I'm resident to bring forward their fiscal operation, the outcome of the fiscal operations. We used to do this in the past, that annually, yes, when the federal government is to present its budget, it will give us also a scorecard of what it achieved. So one of the things I've always advocated, and that is what I believe we need to consider at this point in time we are doing this evaluation, and that is to begin to measure deliverables and stop measuring how much we budgeted and how much we spent. It shouldn't be about how much we spent. It should be about what did we deliver. So what do we want to measure? In fact, we should even begin to move away from measuring GDP. GDP amounts to nothing unless it is evenly distributed. And in which case, we're talking about equality. So if you bring that into the equation, that means we should not really be measuring the size of the GDP, but measuring per capita income and how that also gets to demand on the road. In which case, what are the things that impact the man's life? So what have we done in those aspects that impact his life? So until we begin to measure such things, we will not get far in terms of changing the narrative about our economy and Nigeria.
Measuring deliverables. One key thing I think I'm taking away from this conversation. Thank you very much, Dr. Adedipe, for sharing your thoughts with us.
My pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Dr. Biodun Adedipe is the Chief Consultant at B. Adedipe and Associates. We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll look at cryptocurrency again from the perspective of a regulator. Do stay with us. With a cryptocurrency market currently dominating the Nigeria's investment climate now, the Securities and Exchange Commission decided to enforce some regulations of the market. Recently, the SEC directed individuals and corporates to commence the registration of their virtual activities, including digital asset offerings, initial coin offerings, security tokens, and other blockchain-based offers, while also confirming its readiness and capacity to regulate the space. To give us more insight on this is the head of registration, exchanges, market infrastructure, and Innovation Department at the Securities and Exchange Commission, Timi Agama. Thank you very much, Mr. Agama, for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, the SEC and the CBN had warned in the past that cryptocurrencies were not legal tender and that investors were unprotected in dealing in such assets. Tell us what has changed.
Nothing has really changed. Cryptocurrencies actually are not legal tenders. The CBN was right, and we have also been right. But we are not speaking about cryptocurrencies specifically. We are speaking about digital assets. And that is an information that should go out to everybody. The concentration or the emphasis on cryptocurrencies, for me, is misplaced. Principally, the SEC's intention is to provide a clarification and a treatment of digital assets, for which cryptocurrencies are part of. But in terms of the issuance of legal tender for any country, the responsibility and the authority for such action is principally at the doorstep of the central banks. And the Central Bank of Nigeria and the SEC are cooperating to make sure that we maintain financial stability for our financial system. So at no point has the CBN or the SEC been in a disparity in explaining exactly what it is. Cryptocurrencies are not legal tenders in Nigeria because they are virtual assets. And so they still don't remain legal tender even with the clarifications that we have provided.
How ready is the Commission for the regulation of these assets in terms of infrastructure and technology?
The Commission is very ready, and that is why we have taken our time. And if you will recognize that it has taken us some 2-3 years walking around the space, engaging with stakeholders, and causing the SEC and even stakeholders to understand exactly what we intend to do. And for that reason, the SEC came out with the fintech roadmap, which we issued, and also set out a committee called the Blockchain and Virtual Financial Asset Committee. The essence of these committees is to be able to get information and the pulse of stakeholders within the Nigerian financial space, knowing exactly what we intend to regulate, who we intend to regulate, and how we intend to regulate them. In terms of virtual asset trading, it's our responsibility as the SEC to regulate virtual assets trading on any recognized exchange. And every recognized exchange per the ISA 2007 is expected to be registered by the SEC. So if an exchange is operating in Nigeria without registration at the SEC, such exchanges are illegal. So if a virtual asset is traded on an exchange, such exchange has to be regulated by the SEC and will continue to regulate them. So we are ready in terms of capacity. We're ready in terms of putting in place the necessary infrastructure to be able to do just what we ought to do as empowered by the ISA.
Yeah. Okay. One of the reactions, that have trailed this decision of the SEC is that the SEC only wants to rev up its income stream via operators licensing as opposed to investors protection. What do you have to say about this?
Well, that is totally false. The SEC, under the leadership of Mr. Lamido Oyuguda, is poised completely to protect investors. The reason for that statement we had mentioned earlier is investor protection, market integrity, transparency, and clarity for all intents and purposes. Our responsibility as the Apex Capital Market Regulator is principally for the protection of investors. So whatever idea anybody has with respect to revving our revenue is totally out of place. Our responsibility is to the Nigerian citizens, to the Nigerian investors, and indeed to foreign investors that will want to come and do business in our climate. So it's important that we understand that we need to provide clarity, we need to provide a level playing ground, we need to provide an enabling regulatory environment. That is our responsibility as provided by the law, and as such, that is exactly what we intend to do and what we are going to do in regulating this space.
So what do Nigerians stand to gain when this regulation takes effect?
What Nigerians stand to gain is that there is clarity, there is focus, there is protection, and there is an understanding of exactly what they ought to do, who they ought to engage with, and who they ought to trade with at any point in time.
Now,
first and foremost, and most principally, yes.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Gama.
Yes, most principally is that the investors are our principal concern. A situation where the investors are left unprotected will not augur well for our financial system. Besides, we are closely working with the CBN, the Central Bank of Nigeria, and all other interested regulators to make sure that the environment is safe. And for an environment to be safe, it requires enabling regulatory environment, enabling regulatory framework. And this framework must be established by an entity, an organization, for which the SEC has a responsibility to do. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. We implore the media to, as much as possible, concentrate on the meat of the matter. If you read our statement, you will find out that we are not speaking particularly to cryptocurrencies. We are speaking to digital assets. And digital asset covers so many things. It covers ICO, it covers stable coins, and it covers every other item that falls within the space of being a security or a commodity as defined by the ISA.
Now, do you see the CBN also adopting the same approach as the SEC in the near future?
The CBN has not adopted any negative approach. The CBN has been straight in its statements. I will not speak for the CBN, but the statements that the CBN had released clearly says that cryptocurrencies are not legal tenders. And that is very correct. We work with the CBN and we share their view. We are only saying that if you are trading a digital asset, you must be registered by the SEC, and it must be under our regulation in order for investors to be protected.
Now, crypto assets, is being recognized across some exchanges in other climes. Is this regulatory move a build-up to that level in Nigeria?
When you say crypto assets are being recognized around jurisdictions all over the world, crypto assets are recognized as either securities or commodities. They always test by the U.S. Securities, that the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission relies on, speaks to digital assets, speaks to cryptocurrencies as when they are securities. And indeed, the rules of the CFTC also speaks to cryptocurrencies when they are defined as commodities, because you get derivatives out of those currencies. That is what we are regulating. We are not regulating it as a legal tender because we do not have the powers to regulate it as a legal tender. The responsibility of the issuance of a legal tender still solely belongs to the Central Bank of Nigeria. And as you are aware, we work very closely with the central bank. So whatever we do must be in sync for the financial stability of this country and the financial system as a whole.
All right, thank you very much for your time, Mr. Timi Agama. He is the head of registration, exchanges, market infrastructure and innovation department at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Thank you very much for your time.
For having me.
In the meantime, the Securities and Exchange Commission yesterday granted approval in principle to FMDQ Clear, a subsidiary of FMDQ Group, to carry out central counterparty functions and further perform clearing and settlement services on derivative products. FMDQ Clear's operations as a clearing house over the years has seen the provision of clearing services for the CBN's Naira-settled OTC FX futures product, with over $50 billion worth of contracts executed, cleared and settled till date. Well, joining us now to talk more about this is the Acting Managing Director, FMDQ Clear, Ayodele Onoumi. Thank you very much, Mr. Onoumi, for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much for having me, and good morning.
Good morning. So talk to us about FMDQ Clear's journey towards becoming a central counterparty.
All right, FMDQ Clear's journey towards being a central counterparty commenced around about 4 years ago, where we started off as a central clearinghouse, and in the process cleared in the spot market, fixed income, federal government securities, as well as the OTCFX futures contracts that you mentioned. Over the period, we've cleared circa 200 trillion in federal government securities and about $50 billion worth of OTCFX futures contracts to date. Now, this fits clearly into our long-term objective of de-risking the Nigerian financial market. And we approached it from two angles. The first being de-risking the spot market, and the issues therein were largely around clearing and settlement of transactions. And with the institution of our clearinghouse, a central clearinghouse, we're able to de-risk in that space. Now, the only thing that was left was now managing financial risk, the residual financial risk in the markets. And to do that, it was driven largely, again, one, by products from the FMDQ exchange, which will be the derivatives products, and the CCP, FMDQ Clear in this instance, which will be able to manage the counterparty risk, which is prevalent in derivative contracts.
Now, until now, you have operated as a clearinghouse with your new status of a central counterparty. What will be different?
Okay. Up until now, yes, you're right. We've operated as a central clearinghouse. And what we've done thus far is just carried out a lot of clearing and settlement of transactions, both in the spot and derivative market. But now, as a CCP, what's going to be different is the fact that we're going to be able to novate transactions. Now, what does this mean? We're going to be able to sit in between parties when they carry out transactions in the Nigerian financial market, and we'll be able to guarantee settlement finality, regardless of the tenure of the contract. So when we talk about derivative contracts, and we have tenures 60, 90 days, even in some instances, 5 years, counterparties are worried about the settlement on the delivery date. Now, what we're able to do, leveraging again on our financial resilience and our network parties and partnerships, is to be able to novate these contracts and give certainty to market participants about the completion or settlement of these various contracts.
Now, what will the financial markets benefit from FMDQ Clear's new status going forward?
Okay. I think the critical thing the markets are going to be able to benefit is the de-risking of the financial markets. Up until now, the financial risk within the markets, people did not have, or participants did not have the options or wherewithal to lay off risks they were not keen to take on. So now for banks, for investors, for other financial institutions, where there are risks you are not keen to take on, you can layer these risks off within the derivatives market. So for banks, for example, now they can manage the interest rate risk exposures on their balance sheet. You can have more effective alcos within the banks. For the fund managers, they're able to externalize interest rate risk, which they're not willing to take on. For foreign investors, they're able to hedge foreign exchange risk, which they are not keen to take on. But now, with the birth of the derivatives market and putting in place a robust CCP, the markets have that confidence, additional confidence in the integrity of the market, one, and the settlement of the activities or contracts they're able to go into regardless of the tenor. So for us, two things are going to change. Products are going to come in, and the ability to manage the inherent counterparty risks will also be activated.
Now, this must be some preparatory grounds towards the launch of more derivatives. What new initiatives or products can the market expect with this new development?
Well, speaking from the last comment I made, markets should begin to expect derivative contracts or products that would help them manage critical financial market risks. largely around interest rate derivative products. A number of those are in the pipeline, as well as foreign exchange derivative products. And depending on the appetite for the markets, by being a CCP, we are positioned to manage market risk across the value chain. So even if we're speaking to commodities and all of that, so we're positioned to manage the risks associated with derivative products across the whole risk spectrum.
Now, considering the volatilities brought about by COVID-19, how feasible is the reality of derivatives launch on FMDQ?
I think COVID-19 has made it more imperative for market participants to begin to seek ways to externalize risks they are unwilling to take. Now, one of the things that came with the pandemic is, like you mentioned, the increased volatility within the market, and participants were left with no choice but to internalize this risk. But now, with the opportunity, with the birth of the CCP, with the advent of derivative products, what we expect to see is that participants are now able to pass on or hedge exposures they are not keen to hold on to. And being a CCP now, and our ability to leverage on three critical things. First of all is our financial resilience. We have a default resolution reserve right now, circa 15 billion naira. And with the plan to move that to 30 billion naira in the short term, one. Two is leveraging on our experience. Like I had mentioned earlier on, our experience in clearing in the spot markets, over 200 trillion in FGN securities, and then over $50 billion in the OTCFX futures contracts. And then our network effects, the relationship between the exchange and the clearinghouse and the various partnerships we have in place, where we're certain that we are positioned to bring to the market the risk management of counterparty risk, which the market hasn't seen or experienced before.
Thank you very much, Mr. Onowumi, for your time. Ayodele Onowumi is the Acting Managing Director, FMDQ. Claire. All right, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll do an opening call to London as well as look at the local markets here. Just stay with us. We'll start with some breaking news that oil giant Royal Dutch Shell is cutting up to 9,000 jobs as it overhauls its operations towards greener energy sources. Let's know how this news is making waves in London. Juliana will talk to us. Good morning, Juliana. Well, Shell has unveiled plans to become net zero carbon company by 2050 and plans to cut up to 9,000 jobs. How did the markets wake up to this news?
Well, the shareholders reacted enthusiastically. They were pretty happy with this news. Shell's shares rose by 2% this morning. They are going to be cutting 9,000 jobs. They believe this coal will be fully implemented by the end of 2022. At the end of last year, their staff headcount was about 83,000. And this is really part of a much wider cost-cutting drive, as well as alongside a lot of their rivals. Shell have really been battered this year due to COVID-19 restrictions and, of course, the slump in oil demand, which has really driven down sales. I believe their first quarter profits were down by about 46%. And similarly to what we've heard from Bernard Looney, the MD of BP, they have decided that they want to be a net zero emissions company by 2050 or sooner. We do actually have a statement from Ben van der Burden, who is their chief exec. He said, we'll have some oil and gas in the mix of energy we sell by 2050, but it will be predominantly low carbon electricity, low carbon biofuels. It will be hydrogen, and it will be all sorts of other solutions too. Part of that 9,000 staff reduction will include 1,500 voluntary redundancies, which will take place by the end of this year.
And we've also just learned that the UK house prices have continued to rise, picking up to 5% in September, the highest rate since September 2016. What's driving house prices this time?
Well, it's been a surge of activity over the past couple of months. I believe a lot of observers are putting it down to pent-up frustration. Of course, for a couple of months, the market was closed. People couldn't purchase houses. People couldn't move homes. But that's all changed. And, of course, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, did put in his first COVID budget that he would be having a stamp duty holiday. So a lot of first-time buyers are really rushing to purchase prices whilst it's much cheaper. And also, as well, the time in lockdown has given a lot of people to reflect about the kind of life they want to live. Many people moving outside of London, moving to properties with much larger gardens and prettier bookshelves. So the average price of a home in the UK in September is £226,129. This is the first time ever, actually, that the average house price has gone above £225,000. Of course, if you want to live in London, you can double that. The average house price in London is £480,000. 857 pence. But, you know, a lot of observers are saying this is likely to crash soon. We have seen similar booms like this in previous times. But, of course, what's more significant about this is we are going through a pandemic and there are holidays and mortgage approvals are on the rise. But when that furlough scheme does come to an end, which we've been discussing at the end of October, we are going to be expecting a dip as people start really tightly watching the money in their pocket.
The British beef is back on U.S. menu for the first time in more than 20 years as exports restart today. What will this mean for UK economy?
Well, it's a massive boost. It's a boost that is expected to give about £66 million this year to the British farming industry. As you said, Washington decided to put a ban on British beef about 20 years ago during the mad cow disease or BSE outbreak in 1996. And since that time, we've just not sold to Washington. But before the pandemic, I believe some analysts or some purveyors did come to Britain. They made sure that the beef was OK. So this is long overdue. It should have actually happened in April, but it's happening now. And of course, Liz Truss, the Trade Secretary, she's pretty happy about this and said this is just the beginning to start improving those post-Brexit US-British trade talks. And this is a major boost to that.
All right. Thank you, Juliana. We'll expect to get more updates from you later in the day. And coming back here, Temple has the update from the local markets here. Temple.
Absolutely, Chibaze. Let's look at the equities market and other sides of the markets. Equities continue to remain green. I told you earlier when we opened this week that green is the color of the week, actually. And that's it. 26,611.96 points. That's where we have the all-share index, which was up by 0.39% yesterday. Look at what we're talking about at the equity capitalization, which is now getting closer to the 14 trillion naira market cap. Where are you? Are you on board? Ask that question and, of course, give yourself the answer. So, 22% uptick in the volume of transaction yesterday. Zenith Bank was actually positive by 1.16%. It got some 91 million units of its shares traded yesterday for some huge 1.59 billion naira yesterday. 1.59 billion naira of the 4.52 billion naira value of the transaction that we had in terms of activity level yesterday. All of that came from Zenith Bank. And of course, Dangote contributed to this. MTN, which is the leader in telco, giants in Nigeria here and of course across Africa, was also a major contributor to what we have here because it was actually up by some 79 basis points yesterday. GT Bank also continues to rise. Put all of that together, accounted for the 12% gain that we recorded in the value of transactions yesterday. Banking stocks were positive. Sterling Bank, which is a major tier 2 or mid-tier bank, actually got the approval of the CBDN for a holding company structure, something that is similar to the universal banking status that we used to have in the past. And of course, Access Bank, which of course saw a bit of profit taking yesterday, also secured approval from the central bank to be able to form a holding company structure. So it means that all of their subsidiaries or indirect subdivisions will then be listed here in the stock markets, and we'll see how that pans out eventually. Honeywell was positive 2.22% under the consumer goods. Boa Cement was positive in spite height of a 6% decline in WAPCO yesterday. And of course, Mansard helps to push out, as well as ICO, push up the insurance side of the market, while Seplat joined to push up the performance of the oil and gas sector with some 50 basis points increase. Adedoyin Allen, MD, or Deputy MD, with AfroInvest Securities, joins us now. Adedoyin, talk to us about this bullish sentiment in the market. Does it, in a way, signal some sort of a profit-taking ahead of the Q3 earnings that we will be expecting in the market?
Good morning, Tempo. Thanks for having me.
Great.
So, like you said, the bullish trend in the market, we've seen a bullish trend in the market for 8 consecutive trading sessions. And the NSE All-Share Index has gained 5.1% in September alone and 8.7% in Q3 2020. We've also seen re-emerged interest in the equities market from the foreign portfolio investors and local institutional investors. So these have actually contributed to the bullish trend we've seen. Also, if we look at the low interest rate environment in the fixed income space, it's also made a compelling case for the equities market on a dividend yield basis. And today being the end of a quarter, we anticipate that portfolio managers would want to reposition their portfolio to close the quarter. So we expect to see profit taking in the market in the next few trading days. And also the optimism for the Q3 results might also sustain the positive momentum we've been seeing in the market. We expect improvements in the company's performances due to the progress opening up of the economy. However, any major deviation from this expectation may alter the direction of the market.
Let's not hope for any major deviation.
Let's not hope for any major deviation in the equities market.
All right, Adedoyin, let's maintain that optimism and continue to feed it. Adedoyin Allen is the Deputy MD at AfroInvest Securities. Thank you so much for your analysis about the equity markets today. Of course, there are other parts of the market, but I'm not sure we'll have enough time to actually focus on them. But one thing you should watch is how WAMCO, Friesland Campina WAMCO, listed on the NASD OTC, will perform following the acquisition of Nutrisima, a major subdivision of PZ Cousin, which is a listed company on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. That acquisition came through yesterday, and of the 2.2 million units of shares traded on NASD OTC, we saw over 1.2 million naira, accounting for what we saw the 472 million naira worth of transactions there yesterday. Chimeze, it's back to you.
Well, for the equities there, Tempo, I'm on board. I'm a risk taker, just like you. So as long as you're on board, I'm on board. Let's go there.
Let's be positive. Let's be positive.
Absolutely. All right, that's it on today's program. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwago. Nigeria is 60 tomorrow. Have a good day.